The fluorescent lights above the emergency room flickered like they were tired of witnessing pain. Marcus Reed sat on the edge of a plastic chair, blood drying stiff on his knuckles, the copper smell clinging to his skin. The waiting room hummed, monitors beeping behind walls, a child crying somewhere down the hall, shoes squeaking against polished linoleum. Marcus kept his hands folded. Still, visible. He had learned that lesson early. A uniform shadow fell across him. Heavy boots. A radio crackle. The police officer's gaze skimmed Marcus's hoodie, his dark skin, the way he sat too straight, as if that itself was suspicious. "You can't loiter here," the officer said. Marcus looked up slowly. "I'm a patient." The officer snorted. "Funny. O's full tonight. People faking injuries to dodge arrest." A nurse nearby froze, clipboard tight against her chest. No one spoke. Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his ribs, the old, practiced calculation of tone, posture, breath. He opened his mouth to respond, choosing calm over truth, survival over dignity. The officer leaned closer, voice low and sharp enough to cut. "Don't get smart with me." Heat rushed to Marcus's ears. The room felt smaller, too bright, too quiet. Across the glass doors, an ambulance screamed into the bay. The officer reached for his cuffs. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice. He didn't answer, because in 30 seconds, upstairs, a trauma team would be asking for him by name. And the man gripping the handcuffs had no idea who he was about to put on his knees. Marcus Reed sat with his back straight and his hands folded loosely in his lap, palms open, fingers still. The chair beneath him was mold plastic, bolted to the floor, faintly warm from the body that had occupied it before him. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, unforgiving white. He could hear his own pulse, steady but loud, counting time between pain and patience. The cut across his knuckles had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed in waves, each one radiating up his arm. He ignored it. He had ignored worse. A television mounted in the corner played muted local news. A ticker crawled along the bottom of the screen, words moving too fast to matter. Across the room, a woman clutched her purse and stared at the floor. A teenager tapped his foot, eyes fixed on his phone. No one looked at Marcus for long. He felt it before he saw it, the shift in air, the subtle tightening of the room. Boots stopped in front of him. "You waiting on someone?" a male voice asked. Marcus looked up slowly. The police officer was white, mid-30s, clean-shaven, hand resting casually near his belt. His badge read D. Crowley. "I'm a patient," Marcus said evenly. Crowley's eyes flicked to Marcus's hoodie, then to his hands. "What happened to you?" "I helped in an accident. Someone was trapped. Glass." Crowley nodded like he hadn't heard a word. "You got ID?" Marcus hesitated for half a second, long enough to register his hesitation. Crowley's mouth tightened. "I asked you a question." "Yes," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "I do." "Well," Crowley said, "let's see it." Marcus reached slowly into his pocket, careful, deliberate. He handed over his wallet. Crowley took it but didn't open it. Instead, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know we get a lot of people in here trying to avoid processing." A nurse at the intake desk glanced over, then looked away. "I'm not avoiding anything," Marcus said. Crowley chuckled softly. "That's what they all say." The word they landed heavy. Marcus felt it settle in his chest, familiar and unwelcome. He exhaled through his nose. "I've been checked in," Marcus said. "You can ask the desk." Crowley finally opened the wallet. His eyes skimmed the ID too quickly to read it properly. "You live nearby?" Crowley asked. "Yes." "You got any warrants?" "No." Crowley handed the wallet back with 2 fingers, like it might stain him. "Then sit tight, and don't cause problems." Marcus met his eyes. "I haven't." Crowley straightened. "What's your tone?" Something sharp flickered behind the officer's gaze, something practiced. A challenge, an invitation. Marcus said nothing. Crowley lingered another moment, scanning the room, then stepped away. The air loosened slightly, but the tension stayed, coiled and waiting. A nurse finally approached. She didn't meet Marcus's eyes as she spoke. We'll be with you shortly. Thank you, Marcus said. She nodded and retreated. Marcus leaned back, jaw tight. He could feel the familiar ache behind his eyes, the one that came from swallowing words that deserved air. He wondered, not for the first time, how many people in this room were watching and learning what silence looked like. Behind the ER doors, a gurney rattled past at a run. Someone shouted orders. The hospital surged on, indifferent. Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't move. Across the room, Officer Crowley turned back toward him, hand resting again on his belt. And this time, he didn't stop walking. Officer Crowley stopped 3 feet from Marcus this time, close enough that Marcus could smell coffee on his breath, sharp and stale. The officer didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch, the way people with authority often did, waiting to see who would flinch first. Marcus didn't. You ever been arrested, Marcus? Crowley asked. Marcus looked up at him, brow tightening just enough to show confusion without challenge. No. Crowley tilted his head. Funny. You got that look. What look? Marcus asked. Crowley shrugged. Like trouble follows you. A man across the room shifted in his seat. Someone coughed. The television droned on, oblivious. I'm here to get treated, Marcus said. That's it. Crowley nodded slowly, as if indulging a child. That depends. On what? Marcus asked. On whether you're telling the truth, Crowley replied. Marcus felt the pulse in his injured hand spike. He clasped it tighter, willing himself to stay still. He knew this rhythm. The questions that weren't really questions. The answers that didn't matter. Officer, Marcus said carefully, I've already given my information. If there's an issue, you can speak with hospital staff. Crowley smiled, thin and humorless. Hospital staff don't tell me how to do my job. At the intake desk, the nurse, young, tired, eyes rimmed red, pretended to type. Her shoulders were stiff. Marcus could see the calculation playing out behind her face. Don't get involved. Don't make it worse. Crowley took out a small notebook. He didn't write anything. He just held it. You were at an accident. Crowley said. Yes. You render aid? Yes. You a doctor? Crowley asked, eyebrow raised. Marcus paused. I'm trained in emergency response. Crowley let out a short laugh. Sure you are. Marcus felt something crack. Not loudly, not enough for anyone else to hear. Just a hairline fracture in the wall he kept inside. I'm in pain, Marcus said. I'd like to be seen. Crowley leaned closer. You'll be seen when I'm done. A security guard stood near the doors, arms crossed. He watched, expression blank. Marcus recognized the look. Not my problem. A middle-aged white man in a suit muttered under his breath, unbelievable, then immediately stared at his shoes, as if afraid the word might float back to him. Crowley keyed his radio. Dispatch, run a check on Marcus Reed. Marcus's chest tightened. Why? Crowley didn't answer. Minutes passed. The waiting room seemed to shrink, walls pressing inward. Marcus shifted slightly, wincing as his knuckles brushed his jeans. Crowley noticed. Sit still, he snapped. I didn't. I said sit still. Marcus complied. He always did. He thought of his father's voice, low and steady. Surviving isn't the same as surrendering. But sometimes it looks like it. The radio crackled. No active warrants. Clean. Crowley's jaw tightened. For a split second, irritation flashed across his face. Quick, ugly, unmistakable. Oh, Crowley said. Lucky night. Marcus met his gaze. Does that mean I can be treated now? Crowley stared at him, then looked around the room. Depends on your behavior. My behavior? Marcus echoed. Crowley's voice dropped. Don't push it. A woman near the vending machine shook her head slightly, almost imperceptibly. She didn't speak. Marcus swallowed. He could feel heat rising up his neck, the burn of humiliation settling in layers. He was being managed, corrected, handled, publicly, in a place meant for care. Officer, Marcus said quietly, you're delaying medical treatment. Crowley smiled again. You threatening me? No, Marcus said. I'm stating a fact. Crowley's hand moved, just an inch closer to the cuffs. The nurse finally stepped forward. "Officer," she said, voice thin. "He's been waiting a while." Crowley turned on her. "You got something to add?" She froze. I just meant." "Then go do your job," Crowley said. She retreated instantly, face flushed. Marcus felt the room tip. Not physically, emotionally. The balance had shifted. Crowley knew he had control. Everyone else knew it too. Crowley leaned down, voice low enough that only Marcus could hear. "You think you're better than the rest of them, sitting there all calm. That's what gives you away." Marcus looked up at him, eyes steady despite the ache in his chest. "Gives me away as what?" Crowley straightened. "As someone who needs to be reminded where he is." The words landed hard. Final. Deliberate. Crowley stepped back, hand resting on his belt, eyes scanning the room like he owned it. Marcus felt his phone vibrate again. This time, he knew exactly who it was. And he knew, without a doubt, that the waiting room was about to become something much bigger than a misunderstanding. Marcus shifted slightly, trying to relieve the ache in his knuckles. The ER lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now, oppressive, almost accusatory. Crowley lingered nearby, hands casually at his belt, but Marcus could feel the weight of every glance Crowley threw at him. Each one carried judgment, suspicion, and something sharper, entitlement. A junior resident, a thin man with a stethoscope draped around his neck, lingered near the nurse's station. He tapped his pen nervously against the counter. Marcus caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. "Do something," Marcus thought, but he didn't say it aloud. Any words could be used against him. Crowley spoke, voice low, almost conversational, but heavy with menace. "You know, a lot of people in your position, young, smart, dark-skinned, they try to push the limits." Marcus forced himself to breathe evenly. "I'm not pushing anything. You're here at night, alone, acting suspicious. That's pushing." The resident swallowed hard, clearly conflicted. He wanted to step forward, to remind Crowley this was a hospital, not a street corner, but his shoulders tensed as if to say, "I know my place." A nurse, mid-40s, hair tied back tightly, passed by with a clipboard. She glanced at Marcus, recognition flickering in her eyes for a brief instant. Then she looked away, pretending not to see. Marcus knew her hesitation. She was calculating risk. Am I allowed to intervene? Will I face consequences? "I'm in pain," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Crowley. "I need treatment." Crowley leaned in, his face close enough that Marcus could see the faint scars near his jaw. "You will be treated," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "when it's convenient for me to let it happen." Marcus's jaw tightened. He recognized a pattern: casual intimidation, institutional cover, bystanders frozen by procedure and fear. The ER had become a stage for power, and he was center. A monitor beeped somewhere behind the double doors. Someone shouted instructions. Crowley ignored it. The resident finally spoke, voice barely audible. "Sir, he needs assessment." Crowley turned, expression sharp. "I said sit still. You're new. You'll learn." Marcus caught the resident's eyes, familiar fear reflected back. The young doctor's hands trembled slightly over his clipboard. Marcus understood. They were all trapped in the same system. Rules favor authority, silent protect abusers, and speaking up risks everything. "You see," Crowley said to Marcus, leaning close again, "people like you think the world owes them respect. But the world doesn't owe anyone anything." "I'm asking for medical attention," Marcus said, calm but firm. "That's not a favor. That's a right." Crowley's lips twitched into a half-smile. "Careful with your words. Buddy, you sound like you're arguing with me." Marcus felt the heat behind his eyes, the familiar burn of humiliation that came when someone stripped him of dignity in public. He looked around the room. The nurses, the resident, patients scattered across chairs, all silent witnesses. It was a pattern he knew too well. Systemic complicity, casual bias, power unchecked. The fear in the room was contagious. Even standing upright and speaking clearly, he could feel it trying to pull him down. Marcus's phone vibrated again. He ignored it. Every second stretched. Crowley's gaze lingered, sharp, assessing, predatory. "You've got nerves," he said finally. "I like that." Marcus kept his eyes steady. Inside, he counted breaths, calculated movements, rehearsed responses. He could feel Crowley's impatience, the simmering assumption that someone like Marcus needed to be corrected. A nurse finally stepped closer, voice low, barely above a whisper. "We can get him assessed now." Crowley looked at her sharply. "Do you work here, or do you tell me what to do?" She stepped back instantly, expression apologetic, muttering, "Of course, officer." Marcus exhaled slowly, muscles tight. He realized that the hospital, the place meant for care, for healing, had become a theater of silence. Medical ethics, bystander hesitation, bureaucratic deferment, all working in concert to enforce Crowley's authority. The weight of it pressed against him, but Marcus did not break. He didn't flinch. He didn't react with anger because he knew better. The room, the power, the fear, they were all visible, all manipulable, all predictable. And yet, something had shifted. A tiny crack formed in Crowley's certainty. The officer's casual arrogance hadn't met the expected submission. Marcus had held, silently, with nothing but composure and endurance as shields. The phone buzzed again, urgent, insistent. This time, Marcus knew there was no ignoring it. Across the room, Crowley's eyes caught the movement. His expression changed just slightly, a hint of irritation, or perhaps curiosity. Marcus slid his hand into his pocket. He pressed the phone against his ear. The next moment, everything in the ER, every unspoken tension, every assumption about power and race, teetered on the edge of revelation. He had chosen his moment, and Crowley had no idea what was coming. Marcus pressed his phone lightly to his ear, listening as the line connected. Upstairs, a faint shuffle of voices, clipped and hurried, filtered through. He didn't speak immediately. Every second mattered. Every gesture was observed. Crowley's eyes, sharp and calculating, followed him across the room. "Marcus Reed," a familiar voice said on the other end. Calm, precise. Authority laced through the tone, unyielding. "Yes," Marcus replied evenly. "It's me. I'm here in the ER." There was a pause. Then, "I see. Stay put. We're sending someone down immediately." Marcus ended the call. He placed the phone back in his pocket and straightened in his chair. Every muscle in his body felt the tension between restraint and readiness. Crowley noticed the movement, the slight shift of confidence. He stepped closer. "Everything okay?" Crowley asked, voice light but edged with suspicion. "I'm fine," Marcus said softly. "I just need treatment." Crowley's lips curled faintly, almost a smile. "We'll see." Minutes stretched. The ER was quiet, but the quiet was thick, the kind of silence that made every shuffle of feet, every cough, every click of a keyboard seem amplified. The nurses spoke in low murmurs to one another, glancing at Marcus, then back at Crowley. "Non-compliant," a voice muttered somewhere behind the curtain. Marcus froze. He recognized the coded language immediately. In bureaucratic corridors, words like this were weapons, an excuse to control, delay, or escalate. Agitated, disruptive, resistant. Labels designed to strip authority from those who had it. Labels designed to make compliance appear criminal. Crowley noticed a flicker of recognition in Marcus's eyes. He smirked faintly. "You like hearing that, don't you?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "I'm just listening." The nurse closest to him shifted, almost imperceptibly. Marcus caught the hesitation behind her eyes. She knew something, he realized. But fear, hospital policy, the presence of police, the unspoken rules, kept her from acting. Crowley pulled out his notebook again, flipping it open casually. "You know," he said, "people like you think a hospital is different. Think you're safe." "I'm not safe anywhere that assumes guilt first," Marcus replied softly. The officer's eyes narrowed. Crowley's mouth twitched, the ghost of irritation flickering across his expression. "Do you ever shut up?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer. He waited, letting the silence carry weight. It was a quiet defiance that Crowley wasn't used to facing. A commotion from the trauma bay briefly drew Crowley's attention. Someone shouted for an attending physician. Monitors beeped, gurneys rattled, the sounds of a hospital in motion. But the officer didn't move. He remained focused on Marcus, asserting dominance over time and space. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, he ignored it, letting Crowley fume in the moment, letting the officer assume control while Marcus silently measured his next steps. The nurse finally approached, speaking low. "Sir, he's been waiting a long time. We can get him assessed." Crowley's eyes flicked to her. "Do I need to remind you of your role here?" She stepped back immediately, hands tight on her clipboard. "Of course, officer." Marcus felt the sting of complicity around him. Trained professionals frozen by hierarchy and fear, by habit and protocol, by the assumption that authority always knows best. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the ache of being seen, but not truly seen, heard, but not believed. He leaned back slightly, hand brushing against the phone in his pocket. There was one call he could make, one moment to tilt the imbalance. But Marcus paused. He weighed the cost. The officer didn't know him, didn't know the truth, didn't know what Marcus had built, what position he held. If he revealed himself too soon, would it provoke resistance or collapse? The decision hung between them, unspoken, heavy. Every second stretched into eternity. Crowley leaned closer, voice dropping. "You think you can play these games with me?" Marcus met his gaze evenly. "I'm not playing games." Crowley's hand twitched near his belt. Ready. The room seemed to constrict. Every observer, patients, staff, even the resident, watched silently. Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced down. The caller ID read hospital leadership. He exhaled slowly, letting a flicker of calm settle. He pressed a call, knowing that in the next few moments, the balance of power in the ER might shift completely. Crowley, unaware, smirked faintly. Marcus waited. The line connected. The revelation was seconds away, and the officer had no idea the walls of authority were about to crumble around him. Marcus's voice on the phone was steady, calm, precise, everything Crowley assumed he would never be. "This is Marcus Reed, Medical Director of Emergency Services," he said, letting the title hang in the air like a physical weight. Crowley's eyes flicked from Marcus to the phone, then back to him, disbelief flickering across his face. His hand twitched near his belt. What?" he stammered, jaw tight. "Yes, Officer Crowley," Marcus continued. "I'm in the ER right now, and you are interfering with patient care." The officer's smirk vanished. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, Marcus noticed the uncertainty in the man's posture, the subtle hesitation, the shift in his stance. Crowley had assumed control was automatic. It wasn't. A nurse behind the counter whispered, "Is that—" Her voice trailed off as recognition spread. Murmurs rose in the ER. Other staff members leaned closer, quietly confirming the name. Marcus wasn't just a patient. He was the authority, the person who oversaw protocols, policies, and the very people Crowley had assumed would never challenge him. Crowley's hand lingered near his cuffs. Marcus's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Step aside," Marcus said. "Now! You're obstructing care and violating hospital policy." Crowley's face turned red, first with embarrassment, then anger. "You think this, your position, changes anything?" he spat. "Yes," Marcus said evenly. "It does, and everyone here has witnessed it. Every delay, every intimidation tactic, every assumption you made because of my skin color or because you believed you had authority. It stops now." The nurse who had been closest to Marcus stepped forward, clipboard trembling slightly. I can verify," she said, voice gaining strength as others began to nod in agreement. "Everything he's saying is true." Crowley's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked around the room, as if the walls themselves had betrayed him. Staff members he had assumed would remain silent were now standing in quiet solidarity. The junior resident cleared his throat, finally finding courage. His right, sir. This isn't proper procedure." Crowley's eyes darted around. Humiliation burned hotter than authority. He straightened abruptly. "You can't." "Yes, I can," Marcus interrupted. His tone was calm, controlled, but sharp enough to cut. "And I will." You will escort me to treatment without further interference, or I will have you removed. You've made your assumptions. Now face the consequences." Crowley swallowed, jaw tight, realizing that he no longer had the power he had wielded freely. He glanced at the officers outside the ER doors, who had been waiting for cues. Their expressions were uncertain, as if Crowley's authority had never truly extended beyond his own belief in it. The murmur of the room grew, but it was not chaotic. It was witness, accountability, the slow shift of power back to where it belonged. Crowley's smirk, once easy and confident, was gone. Marcus could see the small cracks forming, the slight tremor in the officer's hands, the rapid blink, the sharp inhale. The veneer of control was collapsing. "Fine," Crowley said finally, voice clipped. We'll step aside." Marcus allowed a subtle exhale. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally, though the ache in his chest remained. Humiliation could be reversed, but the cost of being assumed guilty, of being objectified by authority, left its mark. The ER staff began moving, opening doors and preparing a treatment room. Marcus followed, carefully, deliberately, never letting his eyes leave Crowley's face. Every step reinforced a new order of power, accountability over assumption, truth over prejudice. Once inside the treatment room, Marcus finally allowed himself to sit, wincing slightly as he moved. A nurse approached with gloves, supplies, and a measured professionalism that had been withheld moments earlier. "Thank you," Marcus said softly, "for doing what you should have done from the start." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, eyes meeting his for a brief second with understanding and apology. Crowley lingered outside, watching through the glass panel. He clenched his fists, his ego bruised. The authority he had assumed would protect him had evaporated in the face of truth. He had misjudged Marcus Reed. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from hospital leadership confirming Crowley's immediate suspension pending investigation. Marcus glanced at it, a quiet satisfaction flaring within him. Not triumph, but relief that procedure and justice could prevail, even when power had attempted to bend the rules. He flexed his fingers, the cut across his knuckles throbbing, a small reminder of the physical and emotional cost he had endured. But for the first time that night, Marcus felt seen, not as an assumption, not as a stereotype, but as the person he truly was, a professional, a leader, a human being whose authority and dignity could not be erased by bias or fear. Crowley's eyes narrowed one last time, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Marcus ignored him. He had more pressing matters, patients to care for, policies to enforce, and the slow, deliberate task of rebuilding a space that had nearly allowed injustice to thrive unchecked. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, of clean floors, of life continuing despite everything. Marcus exhaled, settling into the weight of responsibility, knowing the fight was far from over, but confident that the truth, once revealed, could no longer be ignored. By the time Marcus stepped out of the treatment room, the ER had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Staff who had been frozen in place now moved with quiet purpose, whispers carrying behind the hum of machines. Crowley remained outside, leaning against the wall with a forced composure, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Marcus's phone buzzed again. It was a hospital administration, confirmation that security footage and body cam recordings had been reviewed. Crowley's actions were captured in full, every casual intimidation, every dismissive glance, every delay recorded. He exhaled slowly, a mixture of fatigue and grim determination settling into his chest. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. Crowley's eyes met Marcus's as he stepped into the hallway. The officer opened his mouth, but Marcus didn't give him the space to speak. Instead, he pointed to a monitor showing live feed from security cameras. "Do you see yourself?" he asked calmly. Crowley's face twitched. He looked at the screens, saw his own gestures, his voice rising, the subtle ways he had asserted dominance over someone he assumed was powerless. Every observer, every nurse, every patient who had held their breath was visible. Crowley's smirk faltered. Crowley began, but words failed him. "You're suspended, effective immediately," Marcus said, voice steady. "There will be a full investigation. Your department will review your conduct. You had a choice tonight. Every choice you made was recorded. Your assumptions, your bias, your actions, they are all documented." Crowley's eyes darted around, looking for some escape. There was none. Every witness, every professional, every protocol now sided with the truth. The young resident who had hesitated earlier approached Marcus cautiously. "Sir, thank you," he said, voice low. I didn't know what to do before. I was afraid." Marcus placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. "You did the right thing by recognizing it now. It's never too late to act ethically." Meanwhile, murmurs spread through the ER and into hospital administration offices. The news traveled quickly, and by midnight, word of the incident had reached local media outlets. Social media buzzed with comments, some in support, some questioning why a patient had been treated this way, others pointing to systemic issues in law enforcement and hospital policy. Marcus felt a pang of exhaustion, not relief. Victory had a cost. He knew the emotional weight would linger, for him and for everyone else in the room. Crowley, finally escorted by fellow officers, left the ER with shoulders tight, face pale. Marcus didn't watch him go. His focus remained on the staff, the patients, the systems that had almost allowed abuse to continue unchecked. A senior nurse approached quietly. "Sir, do you want a statement?" "To clarify for media." Marcus shook his head. "No. Let the facts speak. Let the evidence speak. We don't need to amplify words. We need accountability." Hours passed. Marcus observed interviews being conducted with witnesses, read reports filed by staff, and coordinated with the hospital administration to ensure policy revisions would be enforced. The body cam footage, once confidential, was now in the hands of investigators and legal authorities. Even as the official processes unfolded, Marcus couldn't ignore the personal cost. Each step he had taken, holding back words, maintaining composure, enduring intimidation, left invisible marks. Trauma, even when controlled, left residue. His mind replayed every moment. Crowley's make, the officer's assumptions, the silence of those who had hesitated. Yet, amidst the exhaustion and the quiet sting of humiliation, there was clarity. He had stood firm, and that act of resistance had shifted the balance. Change, even incremental, was now possible. Later, as Marcus walked toward the exit, he passed by the young resident again. "Learn from this," Marcus said softly. "Systems are built to protect authority. But human decency, that's a true safeguard. Remember it." Outside, the cool night air filled his lungs. Lights from passing ambulances reflected off the glass doors, the city moving in indifferent rhythm. Marcus allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of both endurance and vindication. Somewhere, Crowley's name would be questioned in professional reviews. Complaints from prior incidents surfaced, his record now examined in full. The ER, the hospital, the city, they were beginning to reckon with the patterns of bias and unchecked authority. Marcus Reed walked into the night not unscathed, not triumphant in the easy sense, but resilient. He carried the burden of experience, the knowledge of systemic failure, and the responsibility of ensuring that exposure, not assumption, dictated justice. And though the battle was far from over, tonight marked a turning point. The truth had been revealed, the abuser unmasked, and the witnesses empowered. Marcus's phone buzzed one final time for the night. He ignored it. For now, he allowed himself to simply exhale, knowing that tomorrow work would continue, not just healing patients, but healing a system nearly broken by indifference and prejudice. The following morning, the ER was quieter than usual. The hum of monitors and distant pagers remained, but a cautious tension replaced the usual rhythm. Staff whispered in small clusters, glances darting toward the entrance, toward Marcus, toward the empty space where Crowley should have been. Hospital administration had issued statements to staff and media alike. Internal investigations were underway. Policies were being reviewed. Emails circulated with urgent subject lines, immediate review of ER protocols, staff conduct and law enforcement interactions, mandatory reporting guidelines. Marcus read them, one by one, his eyes tracing the lines of accountability slowly being enforced. He walked down the main corridor, observing the subtle shifts. A senior nurse nodded to him, gratitude in her eyes, though tinged with lingering guilt. A security officer avoided eye contact, shifting weight nervously as he passed. Marcus understood their positions. They were trapped in a hierarchy that often rewarded silence over action. He entered the staff lounge where several nurses and residents gathered. A murmur rose as he approached, heads lowering respectfully. Marcus raised a hand. Sit. Listen. This isn't about punishment alone. It's about understanding, learning, and preventing this from ever happening again. A young resident spoke up hesitantly. So, some of us, we didn't intervene before. Are we in trouble? Marcus shook his head. No. Fear is real. Silence happens. What matters now is what we do next. Accountability isn't just for Crowley. It's for every one of us who witnessed what happened and did nothing. Across town, news of the incident had gone viral. Crowley's name trended, complaints from prior incidents resurfacing online and in city records. The hospital's PR team worked to contain the narrative, emphasizing policy reform and transparency, but the underlying message was clear. Systemic failure would no longer be tolerated. Back in the ER, Marcus reviewed security footage with the administration team. He pointed out details, deliberate pauses, interactions, microaggressions, the subtle ways authority can manipulate fear. The room was silent, everyone absorbing the implications. Marcus's voice cut through the quiet. This isn't hypothetical. This is real, and it happens far too often. We need to learn from it. A middle-aged doctor, one who had remained hesitant the previous night, finally spoke. I realize I stayed quiet too long. I should have spoken up. Marcus nodded. And now you can. It's never too late to act ethically. But remember, prevention is better than reaction. We can't just punish. We must build systems where abuse is less likely to occur. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed Crowley in a conference room elsewhere. The officer's confidence had eroded. Every question was met with hesitation, denial, and half-truths. Marcus had anticipated this. Systems, when confronted with undeniable evidence, could no longer shield abusers. By midday, the hospital's internal review board convened. Marcus testified, recounting events with precision and professionalism. Every word was measured, every gesture deliberate. Staff members corroborated. Security footage played. Emails and logs confirmed timelines. The room was saturated with truth, leaving Crowley's defense crumbling under its weight. Back in the ER, Marcus checked on patients, observing the subtle shifts in demeanor. Staff who had frozen were now more engaged, more willing to speak, more willing to protect patients without fear of reprisal. The environment began to feel human again, though the memory of what had happened lingered like a shadow. The administrative team gathered later for debrief. Marcus addressed them directly. Policies have been updated. Mandatory reporting is clear. No staff member should ever feel they cannot intervene due to fear of hierarchy or retaliation. And no patient should ever experience what happened last night. Enforcement matters, but culture matters more. They nodded solemnly. The realization was heavy. Institutions are only as strong as their commitment to justice, and failure to act allows systemic bias to persist. Marcus walked back through the ER. Crowley's absence was palpable, but so was the energy of resilience. Patients were being treated, nurses moved efficiently, and staff spoke with a quiet confidence that had been missing. Still, Marcus knew the cost remained. Trauma, for him and for staff, lingered. The memory of authority misuse, the fear of escalation, and the moral compromise that silence allowed. These would not vanish overnight. Yet for the first time since the incident began, Marcus felt a cautious optimism. Systems to be corrected, policies enforced, and culture shifted. Change wasn't instant, but it was possible. As he exited the ER at the end of his shift, he paused, glancing back at the fluorescent lights. They no longer buzzed like accusatory witnesses. They glowed steadily, impartial and enduring. Marcus inhaled deeply, ready for the long work ahead. Justice had been initiated, exposure ensured, and now the institution itself was beginning to reckon with its failures. Weeks passed since the incident, but Marcus felt the weight of that night lingering like an invisible wound. The ER functioned again, but not without scars. Staff moved with efficiency, yes, but there was an undercurrent of caution, a reminder that power and prejudice could appear in any uniform, in any hallway, at any time. Crowley had been formally terminated. Complaints from previous incidents had resurfaced, resulting in legal proceedings and media coverage. The City Civilian Review Board had scheduled hearings. Justice, finally, was moving in measured steps, but the emotional cost remained with those who had lived it firsthand. Marcus arrived early for his shift, the hospital still quiet in the gray light of morning. He passed the nurse's station, noting the subtle tension in their posture. Some smiled politely, some avoided his gaze entirely. Each glance reminded him that trauma didn't vanish simply because systems corrected themselves. Fear, memory, and judgment lingered. He opened the office door to review patient files. His knuckles ached faintly, a persistent reminder of the physical injury from that night, and with it came the mental weight of enduring intimidation and microaggression. Marcus exhaled, letting the stress seep into his shoulders. Survival had required composure, but composure was a cost, paid in hours of tension, sleepless nights, and silent calculations. The phone rang. A reporter, gentle but insistent, wanted a statement about systemic changes in the hospital's handling of law enforcement interactions. Marcus declined politely, offering only factual information. He had learned the lesson of public exposure. Words could be twisted, headlines could misrepresent, and justice was less about the story and more about the documented truth. In the lounge, a young resident approached cautiously. "Sir, thank you," he said, voice soft. I'm trying to process what happened." Marcus nodded. "It's not easy. These situations leave marks. We survived, but that doesn't erase the experience. Use it to do better, to stand firm, to protect others." He moved through the ER, checking on patients and staff. Each interaction carried subtle emotional weight, recognition of fear, gratitude, acknowledgement of resilience. He understood now that leadership was never just about titles. It was about presence, guidance, and steadying the balance in moments of crisis. Later, Marcus attended a debrief with hospital leadership. Reforms were being implemented, mandatory staff training, updated policies for police interactions, and clear protocol for escalating issues without fear of retaliation. The system was correcting itself, but Marcus felt the slow burn of exhaustion. Ethical victories were real, yes, but they came with consequences, vigilance, responsibility, and the mental toll confronting bias repeatedly. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his office. The city light spilled through the windows, flickering across the walls. He stared at his hands, the subtle scar from the knuckle injury catching the light. Physical pain was temporary, emotional and systemic pain lingered far longer. A text arrived from a colleague. "We've started training sessions. Staff are responding well. Thank you for pushing this." Marcus typed a short reply. "Keep going. It matters." The room felt both heavy and quiet. Marcus realized that justice had been achieved in part. Crowley's actions had been exposed, staff were now empowered, and policy changes were underway. Yet he also understood the residual cost, trauma, mistrust, and vigilance. Even when systems corrected themselves, human memory held on to the fear, the humiliation, and the threat that authority could be misused again. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a moment. The ache behind his eyes, the lingering tension in his shoulders, the mental replay of Crowley's smirk in the waiting room silence, these would not vanish easily. Resilience, he knew, required acknowledging the cost, not denying it. Outside, ambulances screamed past the hospital. Life continued. Patients arrived, nurses moved, the ER pulsed with urgency and care. Marcus opened his eyes and rose, steadying himself. Trauma lingered, but so did purpose. He walked back into the main ER, nodding to staff and offering brief encouragement. His presence alone reminded everyone that authority could be wielded ethically, that justice was enforceable, and that leadership required both courage and endurance. And though the emotional toll remained heavy, Marcus understood that the work he did, healing patients, guiding staff, confronting systemic failure, was both responsibility and redemption. Victory came not from vengeance, but from persistence, transparency, and the willingness to bear the burden of accountability. As he settled into the rhythm of the ER, Marcus exhaled, letting the night's residual tension ease slightly. The cost of survival, of ethical courage, and of confronting abuse was real, but so was the resilience it forged. Months later, the ER had regained its rhythm, though the memory of that night lingered in subtle ways. Staff moved with confidence tempered by vigilance. Patients were treated with steady care, but everyone carried the quiet lesson of authority misuse and the danger of assumptions left unchallenged. Marcus Reed walked through the corridors with the weight of experience in his stride and the clarity of purpose in his eyes. The hospital had implemented sweeping reforms. Mandatory staff training now included protocol for police interactions, clear escalation channels, and psychological support for staff who witness intimidation or bias. Marcus had overseen the rollout personally, speaking to groups of nurses, residents, and security staff. He had emphasized not just policy but ethics, empathy, and moral courage. Systems are only as strong as the people who enforce them, Marcus said during a training session, voice calm but commanding. Authority unchecked becomes abuse. Silence protects no one. Every one of you can make a difference before injustice escalates. That is your responsibility and your power. The room had been quiet at first, the staff absorbing the weight of what happened. By the end, many approached Marcus, expressing gratitude, relief, and, in some cases, apology for their earlier hesitation. He received each with measured nods, acknowledging both human fear and the courage it takes to overcome it. Crowley was no longer in the picture. His termination had been followed by legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and professional disgrace. Complaints from prior misconduct surfaced, solidifying the consequences he now faced. The city and the hospital had used the incident as a catalyst for change, proving that exposure and accountability could disrupt entrenched patterns of abuse, but not without cost to those who endured it firsthand. Marcus checked on patients, noting subtle improvements in staff morale. Nurses were attentive without hesitation, residents spoke with quiet confidence, and security personnel moved with clear understanding of their boundaries. The atmosphere reflected both resilience and wariness, a balance he recognized all too well. As he passed the nurse's station, a young resident caught his eye. "Sir, thank you," she whispered. "I'm trying to learn how to stand firm when it matters." Marcus offered a brief, understanding smile. "It's not easy," he said, "but even small acts of courage matter. Your awareness and willingness to act will prevent someone else from experiencing what we all witnessed that night." He moved to the trauma bay, where new patients were arriving. The team was efficient, focused, and professional. The pace of the ER was relentless, yet the energy had shifted. Authority no longer intimidated, it guided. Respect replaced fear. Marcus watched, silently satisfied, knowing that the culture he had fought to protect was becoming embedded. Later, Marcus walked alone through the quiet corridors of the hospital. The fluorescent lights, once oppressive, now felt steady, impartial. They illuminated the space where trauma had intersected with courage, where bias had been challenged, and where justice had been enacted not only on one officer but through the institution itself. He stopped at a window overlooking the city. Lights flickered in the distance, ambulances moved through the streets, and life continued, complex, messy, often unfair. He felt the ache of fatigue behind his eyes, the lingering tension from that night. Trauma didn't vanish entirely, and the psychological scars remained subtle but persistent. But he also felt resilience, deep, rooted, and enduring. Marcus exhaled, pressing his hand to the glass. He had endured, confronted abuse, and enforced accountability. Yet he had also learned that even victories carry cost. Emotional labor, ethical vigilance, and the burden of leadership were not light. They demanded awareness, endurance, and the capacity to bear responsibility for others. The young staff members he had mentored would continue the work he had begun, challenging bias, ensuring patients' rights, maintaining professional integrity, and speaking up when authority strayed from ethical paths. Marcus knew that the culture of care he was building would be tested again, but that was the point. Change required persistence, not perfection. He turned back toward the ER. The night was quiet, but within the hospital, the pulse of life, urgent, necessary, and human, beat steadily. Marcus walked into the room where his team prepared for the next wave of patients. He moved with purpose, composed and attentive, aware that leadership was not about avoiding challenges but confronting them consistently and with courage. As he settled into the rhythm of the ER, Marcus's gaze swept over the team. They were alert, capable, and increasingly unafraid to act ethically. The lessons of that night, the assumptions, the intimidation, the near failure of bystanders, were now embedded as collective knowledge. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that accountability had reshaped not only Crowley's fate, but the institution itself. Marcus paused, leaning against a counter, reflecting on the months that had passed. He had survived, endured, and led through one of the most trying experiences of his professional life. And though trauma had left its mark, resilience had left a stronger one. The ER lights reflected in his eyes. They shone steadily, impartial and unyielding, illuminating the space where courage had met challenge. Marcus Reed, medical director, mentor, and survivor, remained standing, not unscarred, not untested, but still standing, and that, he knew, was what truly mattered.